Thank you very much. It's great to be here in Winnipeg. I'm Richard Gage. I've been a practicing architect for 20 years. I became interested in these collapses after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in March of 2006. This has changed my life radically and launched my personal and professional quest for 9/11 truth, inspiring me to found the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I want to thank you guys for being willing to take on the difficult subject of the destruction of the World Trade Center and the staggering loss of life on 9/11. It's extremely important that we know the truth about this event because it served as the pretext for two wars, the invasion of two countries in which almost 1 million people have already perished. It could happen again if we don't dedicate ourselves to finding out exactly what happened and why. These are the reasons we must peer into this painful part of our recent history. And to find out why, for instance, a 2006 poll by the New York Times CBS News revealed that 28% of Americans believe the Bush administration is lying not just about Iraq, but about the events of 9/11. Of even greater concern, another poll by Scripps Howard Ohio University, which found that a shocking 16% believe that the World Trade Center towers were brought down by controlled demolition with explosives. Unfortunately, my research of the last 12 months has confirmed that this is true. This is why we now have the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and why the 9/11 Truth movement itself is growing by millions every year. This afternoon, I'll present to you the very clear evidence that all three World Trade Center buildings, the high-rises, the iconic Twin Towers, and Building 7, were destroyed not by fire, as our government has told us, but by controlled demolition with explosives. I'm employed with a San Francisco Bay Area architecture firm, and like many other architects, I've designed numerous fireproofed steel frame buildings in my career. Most recently, these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums. And I've also been responsible for the day-to-day construction administration services for this $120 million new high school in San Ramon, California. I'm now working on quite a large project in Nevada with almost 2 million square feet of retail, parking structure, and steel-framed high-rise office space with over 10,000 tons of steel framing. But why have most of the architects that I have so far shown this presentation to joined AE911truth.org and calling for a new independent investigation into these collapses on 9/11? And these engineers, you'll find all of them listed on our website, AE911truth.org. Why is Time magazine posting the story that 36% of Americans, and according to this other poll, believe that the administration is somehow complicit in the events of 9/11? The Washington Post, citing the 16% figure of Americans believing the Twin Towers were brought down by explosives. Why have 100 well-known prominent Americans called for an independent probe into 9/11? 110 9/11 survivor and family members. 120 distinguished professors, all independently calling for a new investigation. Well, on 9/11, the American people were subjected to repeated shocking attacks, killing thousands of Americans. This has not happened since Pearl Harbor. The 5 years since 2001 has given us enough time to actually become objective. We have to step out from underneath the hypnotic trance that we were put in and gather the evidence that exposes the need to reevaluate these three World Trade Center high-rise collapses more objectively. Let's begin with an overview of the events of that morning so we can all get on the same page and take a look at the myth that developed.
September 11th, we learned that 4 passenger planes were hijacked and taken radically off course. Within an hour, 2 of the planes had flown into the enormous steel towers at the World Trade Center, creating fires and eventually toppling them. Dazed by the news, the American public soon believed the fires in the towers had burned so hot they caused the steel frames of the buildings to give way. A myth developed, fed by official sources through the media to a bewildered audience. Elements of the myth: the impact of the airplanes, gallons of burning jet fuel, steel melting, the buildings failing and suddenly imploding. In a mere 10 seconds, 110 stories hurtled earthward, pulverizing into dust. Right from the start, on the street itself, the official story was born.
Come out of nowhere and just scream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
The myth bled into the FEMA report and was echoed by the experts.
It was the combination of the impact load doing great damage to the building, followed by the fire, that caused collapse.
Buildings are destroyed by a number of different forces, each having very different identifiable characteristics. For instance, fires affect building differently than controlled demolition and explosions. Fires, by their nature, tend to creep from place to place as they run out of fuel and find fresh fuel sources, leaving behind the burned out area to cool. Now, when collapses do occur, and they have never in a high-rise office building, but for instance in wood buildings, they begin gradually and asymmetrically with large, visible, slow deformations. So remember this. Controlled demolition we'll be taking a very close look at. When buildings topple, as in earthquakes like this, their mass tends to hold together. They don't pulverize to concrete. When buildings pancake, like this concrete building in an earthquake in Mexico, you tend to see a whole lot of pancakes on the bottom. We'll be looking for those pancakes when we get to the World Trade Center. And when buildings explode, we see flashes of light, visible streamers, lots and lots of explosive smoke and dust from pulverized concrete. These buildings fell over or collapsed. They tend to hang together. They don't pulverize to dust. They follow the path of least resistance. They don't fall straight down through themselves and turn to dust. Note the thick, dense billowing and enormous clouds with explosions. The shooting streamers, flashes of light. We'll be looking for these elements in all 3 World Trade Center high-rise collapses. This one on the lower right looks just like the Twin Towers, but it is not. It is an acknowledged explosion. We'll be comparing it to the Twin Towers. Let's focus on controlled demolition first. We have hundreds of examples of controlled demolition from all across the country from which to make our comparison to Building 7. Because it's the most commonly used method to bring high-rise buildings down or demolish them. This is what a high-rise looks like when it's being demolished. Controlled demolitions can be engineered in many different ways. Normally, the purpose of a controlled demolition is to remove a structure while avoiding damage to adjacent structures and to do so economically. Typically, a tall building is demolished by placing thousands of cutter charges adjacent to columns and beams throughout the building, and then detonating them in precise order, starting with the interior structure and then progressing outward and upward, synchronistically timed floor by floor. Destroying the interior columns allows the unsupported weight to pull the exterior inward, and destroying the building from the ground up allows the weight of the building to be harnessed to do much of the destruction. The result is an implosion, producing a vertical collapse at free fall speed into a consolidated rubble pile, which is broken up and ready for loading and shipment. This is what we see in all three of the World Trade Center high-rise buildings, and we'll take a close look. Now, this is a feat that only a handful of companies in the world can accomplish. And we're told that fire accomplished exactly this for the first time ever on 9/11. So what are the typical features of these of controlled demolitions? Well, we have direct evidence of explosives, starting with sounds produced by explosions, rapid onset of destruction at the base, dust clouds, thick, billowing, and enormous, pulverized concrete. We have evidence of cutter charges. We have squibs, or explosive cutter charges, visible at the upper floors, demolition waves which remove column support, and a total collapse of the steel skeleton, broken up and ready for shipment. In addition to this direct evidence, well, the result of all of this is a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint, because all columns are cut on a floor at once, synchronistically timed, resulting in a free fall speed of collapse. So we'll be comparing these features to Building 7 right away here, one by one. In addition, we have no typical characteristics of destruction by fire: the large, slow deformations, the creeping from place to place, the asymmetrical collapse of any structure that is destroyed by fire. But also, we have government documentation, which we'll be looking at in the case of Building 7, expert corroboration. Do controlled demolition experts say that this was a controlled demolition in the case of Building 7? Do we have foreknowledge of the collapse? Well, we always know when controlled demolitions, they're planned months in advance. Turns out in Building 7, we'll be finding foreknowledge. We have plenty of video documentation, all of which goes to support the hypothesis of controlled demolition, which turns out to be quite easy. So let's see if Building 7 has any of these features. Well, Building 7 is this tall, 47-story skyscraper. How many of you have never heard of Building 7? Usually there's a whole bunch of people. Most of Americans have not. It's 47 stories. It was never hit by an airplane. It suffered some damage by the North Tower when it came down. And we'll see what happened to it. It's about a football field length away from the North Tower on the other side of Building 6. You can see Building 7 here in the aftermath after the Twin Tower, North Tower came down. So here's the building in its pristine condition and then being pelted during the collapse of the North Tower. We'll be taking a look at all of this dust coming up in a moment. Now here we have a shadow of this building on Building 7. Remember, 47 stories, so don't get confused by the shadow line above the fires. There are 2 or 3 fairly small fires, which is the only graphic evidence we have of fires in this building. There's smoke on the other side, and there's some dispute whether that was part of the Building 7 on fire or another building behind it. So we have 2 small fires, never hit by a plane, random damage from the Twin Towers. So let's march our way through the evidence here, and you can follow along in your handout to see where we are and how we're doing. Let's take a look at CBS video and listen to Dan Rather.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
I want to show you this again because I want to refer your attention to the penthouse, which falls first, indicating core column
damage. What you're seeing
damage.
are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Even Dan can pick up the obvious comparison to controlled demolition. Let's take a look at the NB's, and he never repeated that statement again, by the way. How does this happen? We have 24 core and 57 perimeter columns around this building. What could make all 81 of these columns fail simultaneously so that the building would collapse straight down, rapidly, symmetrically, in 6.5 seconds? How is that possible? Since the small fires and the damaged columns were only on one side, we're told by NIST and FEMA that the columns were damaged on this side. We're looking at the other side. Wouldn't we expect, for instance, if I broke my leg and I was going to fall toward the injury, that the building would do the same? No. The only way to do this is to take out all the columns at once. Now, this is an unusual building. It was built over a Con Edison substation, so there were some large spans spanning across the Con Edison, some trusses, cantilevered beams, and so forth, which would make it even more vulnerable if one of those supporting elements, a column or a truss, were to go down in a fire, which, remember, is not all the way around the building uniformly, heating all those columns up at once. No. The building would fall over, favor one side. Let's take a look, finally, at the north side on West Street. Okay, now, watch this. What do you see in the upper right corner? Anybody? You see 4 explosions. We're going to be taking a close look at those. There's no fire engulfing this building. There is no fire alleged to have been on those upper floors either. Watch them. Okay, we'll take a closer. Coming right up. Do we have sounds and sights of explosions in Building 7? Let's listen to an interview with this emergency worker.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound. It sounded like a cloud of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was. It looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. Then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out. And the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. We were in shock, and then the worst part about it, we saw the smoke and the plumes of smoke coming.
A shock wave ripping through the building, windows busting out, and then the building coming down. Craig Bartner of the New York Fire Department.
And the whole time you're hearing boom, 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 boom. So I think I know an explosion when I hear it. I was real close to Building 7 when it fell down, and running away from that sucked.
This incredible dust flow you're seeing right now, I want you to watch that very carefully. It's the only evidence we have of this massive pyroclastic, pulverized concrete and pyroclastic flow or heat-induced cauliflower-like expansion of the dust that we can see in Building 7, which is direct evidence of explosives.
That's one of the things that I live with all the time, and I don't know, but that didn't sound like just a building falling down to me while I was running away from it. There's a lot of eyewitness testimony down there hearing explosions. I didn't see any reason for that building to fall down the way it did, and a lot of guys should be saying the same thing.
This is why I do not argue with structural engineers about fires and what they can and can't do to steel. 90% of our evidence is not attacking the NIST report or the FEMA report, but showing the evidence of demolition, which is undeniable. Let's look at what fire does, though, to the building. Because the New York Times cited that experts said no building like it, a modern steel-framed high-rise, had ever collapsed due to fire. And fireproofing is intended to protect a building for 2 or 3 hours at the most. And even then, buildings have never collapsed in a fire of any duration, that is, high-rise steel-frame buildings. Even though, for instance, in these fires, numerous examples of which they burned for well over 3 hours. In this case, Caracas, 17 hours over 26 floors. Did the building collapse? No. Los Angeles, 3.5 hours over 5 floors. Did the building collapse? No. Philadelphia, Meridian Plaza, 18 hours over 8 floors. Did it collapse? No. New York, 50 stories high. It burned for 6 hours. None of these have collapsed. They're all in use today, having been refurbished. And yet, on 9/11, these 2 small fires on one side of Building 7 are responsible for bringing this building down in 6.5 seconds. After burning all afternoon, it came down at 5 in the afternoon. If there again were fires on the other side, we'd expect the building to fall away from us and favor its injury, not come straight down. Again, buildings that collapse follow the path of least resistance, not straight down through themselves. It's completely diametrically opposed to every principle of structural engineering, which is designed to resist the forces of gravity. That structural engineers can identify with. Am I right? Where's my structural engineer? Government documentation. Well, we had 4 reports. American Society of Civil Engineers, FEMA, Silverstein, Weidlinger, and NIST. Throughout each one of these reports, we have the same cast of characters coming and going through them. We're told that they were volunteers. But these volunteers were not volunteers like you go down to the PTA and say, I'll help out. These were highly paid defense contractors who had ongoing contracts with the federal government at $10 million annually. So they had a huge stake in producing a report that favored their client. This is not unbiased. We have the FEMA report with only $600,000 of funding. Up until 2004 or 5, that was the only report we had from the government, and compare that funding to $40 million for the Bill Clinton affair with Monica. So we're not looking at a serious effort to get at the truth here. NIST finally got a 3-year, $20 million project, which we're going to be taking a quick look at, which is an incredibly highly polished effort at concealing the truth. FEMA suggests, however, thank you very much, that the collapse of World Trade Center 7 had a small debris field as the facade was pulled downward, suggesting internal failure and implosion. Demolishing the building so that it collapses straight down into its own footprint requires such skill that only a handful of demolition companies in the world will attempt it. But thank God, fire did it on 9/11 without having to pay the demolition contractors. The specifics of the fires in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown. This is after 3 years of study. We don't know what happened. Our best hypothesis, fire, then complete collapse, has only a low probability of occurrence. Further research, investigation, and analysis are needed to resolve this issue. Unfortunately, though, for investigators hoping to resolve the issue, the evidence had been completely destroyed by FEMA before it could be resolved. NIST had no steel from World Trade Center 7 to analyze. The 9/11 Commission, who was sworn to give us the complete, fullest possible account of the events surrounding 9/11, did not even mention the building in one page or one sentence of their 571-page report. Max Cleland, for this and other reasons, resigned from the commission, stating this is a national scandal. This investigation is compromised. Do we have a free fall speed of collapse? Well, here's a second-by-second drop of the building. With each passing second, the building drops faster. This indicates acceleration, which is due to gravity, and no resistance to that acceleration in the columns. You can plot the data on a graph of time over distance drop, and then you can lay a theoretical curve of free fall right over it, and it fits perfectly, indicating the columns were removed, which could only be done by explosives. Do we have expert corroboration? Well, here's the top European controlled demolition expert, Danny Jawenko. It starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns.